Hi, this is Jim DiGiovanni with Sky King Creative. This tutorial is inspired by some graphics that I saw in the theater during the sneak peek first looks before the movie started. So the idea here is that this is all created using Cinema 4D and After Effects, and it's basically some very, very simple geometry that's using a bunch of different displacement effects, and then some simple type flying in, and then we've done a little bit of color correction here in After Effects to just to get the look right. So I'm using Cinema 4D R13 and After Effects, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when I get started in a new scene in Cinema 4D is I like to set up my render settings, and then I like to set up my cameras. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into render settings up here and open that up, and I'm going to change this render setting from 800 by 600 to a 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and I'm going to be 1280 by 720. That's 16 by 9 aspect ratio. You see it actually pops in a pre-existing preset for that. I'm just going to lock that aspect ratio, and I'm going to make my project 300 frames. 300 frames here. And that's all that we're going to do for now in our render settings. I'm going to close that out, and I'm going to save my project file. And this is going to be called Sneak Peek Wave. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up two cameras, and the reason why I set up two cameras is I set up a render camera, which is what we're going to output, and then I set up a view camera, which I can switch around and go back and forth in between while I'm setting up my scene. Very simple. I'm going to cameras. I'm going to name this one render camera, and I'm going to duplicate it by holding down the control key and dragging down, and I'm going to just call this one view camera. View camera. Now, if I look at it in the top view here, you see that there's only one camera really being seen here, and the reason why is because they're both occupying the exact same space. I'm going to choose one camera and just move it a little bit so you can see. So I'm going to use my view camera, and I'm just going to kind of move around a little bit, and you see instantly what's happened is now we have two different cameras here. You can actually see my render camera here, and if I back this out, you see that the view camera is lit up. Now what I'm going to do is I don't really want to have this display up while I'm working. It starts to get a little cluttered here. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to set both my view and render cameras, and I'm going to put them in a new layer. Okay? And I'm going to pop over to my layers palette, and I'm going to call this camera layer. And this way I can turn this on and off when I want to. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off the display on my view layer so it just keeps the scene uncluttered. So here's my render camera, and when I want to switch to the render camera, I can either go camera, use camera, render camera, and it just kind of moves to that camera, or, and back again, I can just click this little white box right here, a little gray box that turns white. Now we've switched to the render camera, and you see the display changes. Okay, now that the cameras are set up, we're going to get started on the project. Now, if you've been to a movie recently, you've probably seen, if you've gone to an AMC theater, this is where I've seen this sneak peek wave graphic. It's something called First Looks, and something that you see in the AMC theaters. I'm not sure if they have it in the other theaters across the country. But I was just at the theater and I saw that, and I thought it looked pretty cool, so I wanted to try to recreate it. Now, what you have is you have a huge wave of cubes, thin little polygon boxes that are kind of flipping towards you and waving towards the camera as a background element, and then we have some text flying in to kind of feature a particular part of the movie. Now, I'm going to start not with a box, not with a cube, but with a plane. And the reason for that is because I just want to start with a very simple piece of geometry. If I use a cube instead of a box, I would be dealing with 6 polygons instead of 1 polygon. So I'm trying to make this as simple as possible while I'm doing the setup. So first of all, I'm going to select my plane. I'm going to go to Attributes Editor. I'm going to change the width and height to 100 centimeters just to make it an even number here. And I'm going to change my width segments to 1 and my height segments to 1 because there's no deformation here. And there's going to be a lot of polygons to deal with. So that's fine. I'm also going to change my orientation here to positive X. So it's kind of facing us here, okay? And I'm looking through my render camera right now. Now I've added my plane And now we're going to start to build out the MoGraph part of it. Or what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add my box, my cube, and we'll work with it later. I'm just going to add it for now, and I'm going to make it 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters by 100 centimeters, and I'm actually going to make the depth of it, I'm going to just squeeze it in here and make it 20 centimeters deep, 20 centimeters in X. Okay. Now, for now, I'm actually going to add this to its own layer, and I'm just going to call this cube layer. And while I'm at it, I may as well create a new layer for the plane layer as well. So I'm going to turn my cube layer off because I'm not going to be working with it right now, and I'm also turning off the rendering. This is the rendering, this is the view. So we just have our plane. I need to create a MoGraph object here. So I'm going to go under MoGraph, Cloner. Cloner object, I'm going to drag my plane into my MoGraph cloner, and it's going to give me 3 planes going up in Y space, and I don't want that. If you go to Cloner here, Cloner object, got to go back to my attributes, and the mode, we don't want to be in linear mode. Grid array here, and what I want to do is I want to set my count to 1 in X, 12 in Y, and I'm just going to say 36 in Z for now. Now it's all clumped together here. You're not really seeing anything yet, and that's because we have a 100 centimeter plane sitting inside a 200 centimeter clone, so they're all kind of bunched up together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this out here like this, and seeing that, it's probably seeing that I have more clones than I need. I'm going to back up my render view in a second, my camera. Okay, but basically I'm just trying to set up this wall here. Let me back up. Okay, so that's my wall. Now, just looking at this, I can see that the wall is 3 times longer than it is tall, and it's probably not the exact dimensions that I want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just kind of positioning my render camera for now about what I think. I'm kind of basing it on the size of the cubes that I'm looking for here. So now with that many cubes, I see that I'm going to want to increase the amount of cubes vertically. I can probably reduce the amount of cubes horizontally. Looking here. So cloner, and let's say I want 16 cubes vertically, and again I have to increase the size here so that they separate, just like that. And I'm going to reduce this one to 32, and when I reduce it, you'll see that it actually opens up the space, and the reason why that is because what MoGraph is doing is it's just trying to fill the allotted space, which in this case is 3,800 centimeters, with the amount of clones that we've specified. Now, if we want to work logically, we can just say, okay, I want it to be 16 clones tall and 32 clones wide. I can make this 1,700 centimeters by 3,300 centimeters, and it basically gives me a pretty tight spacing, but I do want to close this up a little bit more vertically. So I'll say 3250 or so. I'm just going to play with this setting a little bit. That looks pretty good. I want these cubes to be tight, but what's happening now is it's not quite long enough, because as this wave moves, it's going to displace this. So I need to increase the clones just by a few. So let me just go back up to 36 cubes, and I'm going to increase this sizing to 3,800, 1,700. Roughly that looks pretty good. So there's my cube set up. If I take a quick render here, it's just all gray. The next thing I'm going to do is just give these planes a color, because everything's kind of gray here, the display and everything, so it's just a little hard to see what we're doing. So I'm going to create new material, and very simply I'm going to drag this material on top of my plane. And you see everything turns kind of a lighter color, but I want to make this, just make this sort of a medium blue, just so we can see a little bit more clearly what's happening here. Next, what I'm going to do is I really want to add my point of interest here, and my point of interest is not this cube background. I'm just going to add some text that will animate in later. I just want to kind of frame my scene a little. I'm going to create some MoGraph text here. MoGraph, MoText, and I'm just going to set up a few settings here. So I'm going to call this Summer Movie Sneak Peek. You have to change a few orientations here, so I'm going to select my MoText, and the first thing I'm going to do is align its middle, and then we need to rotate it here. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees in the y-axis, and I'm going to move it forward. Now it doesn't have to sit right in the center of the scene here. You can see there's my camera here, and here's my text. I'm just going to move it over a little bit and move it up. And I'm actually going to move it in a little bit closer. So I'm actually going to move it forward a little bit so it's pretty close to the camera. Just like that. And I'm going to set a few other settings here, just with the type. Being a designer, I like good typography. So I'm going to select this font, and I'm going to go under here, and I'm going to choose Museo. That's a cool looking font. And the height is about right. I'm going to make this 700 italic. Gives it a little bit of a nice look to it. And the height is about right. The height is the size of the type. And I'm just going to say, yeah, let's make it 180. So it's a little smaller. And the vertical spacing, I'm just going to tighten it up a little bit here. So, okay. So there's my Summer Movie Sneak Peek. Now that I have my type in my scene and it's basically framed the way I want, I do want to tweak my type a little bit here as far as how it's styled. And this is a perfect example of why I would want to use my view camera or my render camera. I want to keep my render camera where it is right now, but I'm going to switch to my view camera by just clicking here. And now what I can do with my view camera is just sort of zoom in on the type and style the bevel a little bit. Type selected. I'm going to go to caps. I'm going to add a fillet cap on the start. Now that's going to be too thick. I just want a little bit of a highlight here. So I'm going to adjust the radius down to about, let's just split the difference and say 1.5. And I'm going to round it a little bit. I'm going to just want to round that out a little bit. 3 steps there. Now that looks a little bit nicer. Now I'm going to switch back to my render camera. Okay, and now I'm seeing that nice little highlight, which is what I'm looking for. And we haven't lit the scene or anything, but if you look closely, you can just sort of see that nice highlight there. So that's basically what I want. All right, so we'll get to actually stylizing the text as far as color and everything later. Right now we have enough contrast to work in the scene. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add a very simple camera movement. And the reason why I want it to be so simple is because there's going to be a lot of other animation going on in this scene. And a very drastic camera movement would make the whole graphic kind of hard to watch. So we don't want that. We want just a very simple camera movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find basically my end frame here. I'm going to go to frame 300 and I'm going to have my render camera selected. And I just want to find my stopping point here, where I want to be at the end of this animation. Right about there. You know, we could go in like this with the big sort of dramatic, you know, up and in sort of look, but I think I want to go at this angle here. And actually, yeah, actually what I'm going to do here, and this is something you really can't set using these controls. With the render camera selected, I'm going to go into my coordinates, and I'm going to give this, I'm just going to work with some round numbers here. So 65, -5, and I'm going to give it a little 10% bank. And that's too much. I'm going to give it 6%. And that just gives a little bit of visual interest because it's a little bit more exciting that way, okay? Just a little bit of an exciting look. I want to move this down. Because I've added that banking, I need to move my text a little bit. Giving the camera a little bit of a bank will give it a nicer look at the end. So I like this basic position here for my camera. So I'm going to create a keyframe for the camera. And then I'm going to grab my MoText object and just move it up and frame it a little bit better. Here, okay. There's my MoText object. I don't need to keyframe that. That's just the object. But that looks pretty good as a finish frame. A start frame here. I'm going to go all the way back to frame 0. And I'm going to set a couple other things here. So with my camera, make sure you select your camera. I'm going to back it up a little bit. not much, just a little. I'm going to add a little bit of a rotation. I'm just going to kind of eyeball this, a little bit of a rotation, and a little bit of a pullback. And I'm going to take off that banking here. And that'll actually affect, I'm going to go full screen on this. That'll actually affect, I think I'm going to have to add some polys here on the bottom and top. We just hit another keyframe and we'll just preview that to see what that looks like. Just the camera move here. That's pretty subtle. I think I may want a little bit more movement than that. Let me back this up a little bit more. I'm just going to have to add some more polygons here. Okay, I'm really looking at the camera move right now. So I'm going to hit OK and I'm going to hit playback. And the text starts to fly in around frame 160. And I think that's going to look pretty good, actually. So I'm going to save my file. Now, for now, I'm going to turn off my text, my movie text. And the best way to do that in this case is I'm going to go under here and I'm going to create a new layer. Add to new layer. I'm going to go into my layers manager and say text layer. And I'm going to hide it. Okay, so I've turned the text off. I'm going to go back to my attributes manager and I'm just going to run another preview just to see if I generally like this movement. Okay, and we're kind of going across the 0 point and the Y barrier, and it's a nice simple move and it works for me. So we're going to go with that. But you can see here that I've got a lot of extra space here that I really want to have covered with some more tiles. I'll go back to my quad view and I need to increase the tiles, but I need to try to do it as judiciously as possible here. So cloner, object. So let's see, let's just say I need 20 and I'm going to make this 2100 centimeters. Okay, that might be a little more than I need. Let me see. Take a quick render of that. Yeah, it's more than I need. Well, it's right on the edge. That's going to be fine, but I do need to add maybe another row or two here. Let me just try moving my cloner over to see if that fills the space. Okay, so that fills the space in the z-axis. So let me see now if it fills it all the way across. Yeah, so I just needed to kind of tweak it over. I didn't need to add any more polygons this way. See how many more I have here. And actually, I could probably reduce it by 1. So let me just say 35, and I'm going to change this to 37. And like I said, I just want to have only the minimum amount of cubes that I need.